Okay, why don't we get started? First, I'd like to welcome everyone today to our webinar, Achieving Goal Zero Performance, Eliminating Non-Compliance Events. Our speakers today include Sam Smolik. Sam is the author of The Power of Goal Zero. He retired in 2017 as a Senior Vice President of Americas Manufacturing at LyondellBasell. Prior to that role, he was a Global Vice President of EH&S at Dow, Shell, and LyondellBasell. Also joining the webinar is Christian McDermott. He is a North America Market Coordinator for Voovio Technologies. Christian has 13 years experience in tech and consulting and is an expert in knowledge automation software. And myself, I am Francis Montemuro, Director of Operations at Voovio. Prior to joining Voovio 3.5 years ago, I spent over 30 years with DuPont. Sam, Christian, thank you for joining me. So in Sam's book, The Power of Goal Zero, he shares his personal experiences and explains how to be an effective leader and deliver results. He gives us a recipe for implementing operational excellence within our organizations. Simply, operational excellence equals leadership, people, culture, systems, and assets. His common sense formula for achieving operational excellence rang true for me. At the core of excellence is the organization's culture, which is shaped by its leadership, its people, and systems to ensure sustainability. Leaders at all levels within an organization, from executive vice presidents, plant managers, to frontline managers, will benefit from his book. Their organizational influence will positively affect change and deliver results. Before turning it over to Sam to hear about his book, I'd like to have Christian speak briefly about Voovio. Christian?
Thank you, Fran. So I'm going to show you some techniques to support what Sam is going to talk about on systems and human performance. A system can standardize procedure, execution, and improve human performance. And these are some of the foundations of operational excellence that Sam's going to touch on. In his book, Sam writes, "People can leave, but the knowledge remains." And this is what we want. So how can we prevent institutional knowledge from walking out of the door? And Sam also talks about competency. And when we talk about competency, he says, we don't just mean the basic understanding of the process or the job. He's also referring to knowledge of and ability to perform and execute procedures. So this is what I'm going to focus on here. And I want to share my screen and talk through some and show some real examples of some techniques that you can use. So you're hopefully looking at a platform here on my web browser. Now, this is a platform designed for people, for operators, to build procedure competency and measure it. So similar to systems that manage and measure your assets, enabling predictive maintenance and so forth, with all those sensors in the field, this is designed for people, and a system gives you data, and we're going to touch on how that's important. I'm going to start off with a procedure simulator. So this is part of the system that I'm showing you. So this is where you can capture and store procedure knowledge. You can standardize the procedures and the way people learn them. So let's explain quickly what's on the screen here. So we have the digital replica, we call it, on the right. This is a real view of a plant where we're going to perform the procedure that you see here. We have a map at the bottom on the right. We have the procedure document. So this is a standard operating procedure, could be a maintenance procedure or lockout, other critical procedure. Above that, we have an action checklist. So basically what you're looking at is a form of a virtual trainer, like a subject matter expert that you can utilize independently of people. It's a system always available. And the action checklist, I just want to say, actually provides clear instructions. So it removes ambiguity and clarifies generalizations you have in procedures. For example, if a procedure says close all the drain valves, and that's all it says, but if there's 11 of them, we would have 11 action items here in the checklist. So what I'm going to do here to illustrate what I'm talking about is actually perform the first couple of steps. And you'll see that I'm actually physically having to interact with the equipment here on my laptop. And in any step, you'll see a knowledge snippet appears. This is a really important part of capturing and institutionalizing tribal knowledge related to specific steps in your procedures or equipment. So it's always accessible. That's the key. It's linked to the specific action step, easy to access and always available regardless of whether a trainer or an SME is on site. So the system walks you through the procedure. So I can actually learn a procedure independently of anyone else. So let's move on to the second thing I want to show, which is the fact that simulators or systems like this allow you to test the knowledge of procedures, and this gives you data, and that's really key. It gives you data to continuously improve the organization. So what I'm going to do here is perform the first couple of steps as I was before, and I'm going to do the first one correctly here. So I'm going to close this drain valve and confirm, and you'll see I get immediate feedback on the left in that green box. So now I'm going to walk down here and make a mistake on purpose. So I'm going to crack open the wrong valve. And you'll see that when I do this, you get immediate feedback and it's tracking everything I'm doing. So because this is a system, a simulator, I can try again. I can learn from my mistake. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I'm going to reset myself here to that blue valve that is always left open, which we learned in the knowledge snippet, confirm, and you'll see that the system tracks that I got it correct after 2 attempts. So all of this data is captured in a report. So here you have a detailed log of my knowledge of this procedure. And all of this is actually stored and tracked here in the system. So let me explain what kind of data we have. You're able to track who has completed, for example, this procedure test that we assigned to a group of people, all of those who completed it and all of those who did not complete it with their appropriate scores and access to the test reports. In addition, because we're collecting all this data, in this type of system, you're able to present that data in a meaningful way. So what you're looking at here is the performance of that group of people on this procedure. And you'll see that 13 people got 100%, which is very, very good. But on the other end of the spectrum, 3 people got 75%, which is below the passing score. So immediately here, you can see that you may want to focus your attention on these 3 individuals. In addition, there are other metrics that a system allows you to have. Here, you can track which steps in a procedure test were answered incorrectly and how frequently they were answered incorrectly. So you'll see action step 4 was answered incorrectly 3 times. And you can even pull this up in the simulator to review why that is. And you'll see on this step, 2 identical valves right next to each other, people were opening up the wrong valve. So the system allows you to look at data in a meaningful way, and you have metrics. So all the data you collect from your people allows you to predict gaps in your people's reliability, exactly like sensors on equipment show you how it's running and also allow you to predict issues. So that's what I wanted to touch on. And summarizing that, to achieve operational excellence, you need a system to help you. So we're going to go back to the slides. 1 second. And hopefully, if you can confirm that you can see the slides again.
Yes.
So Sam is going to expand on this and provide you with the recipe to catch operational excellence, as he describes, and achieve that goal zero. So Sam's book, The Power of Goal Zero, is really a superb read. It's simple and it's engaging. And it really lays out how to create a culture of excellence using a management system that you can understand and maintain. So I'm going to pass it over to Sam here, and I'll speak to you in the Q&A.
Okay, Christian, thank you very much. First off, I don't know if Fran said it or not, but we want to encourage a lot of Q&A and discussion and address your issues. So start putting any questions that you have in the chat box, and I think that's how we'll do a Q&A at the end of the session. Just a quick overview of my book. I had a really interesting career the last 20 years in Dow Chemical, Shell, and LyondellBasell. My job was to help influence plants around the world and people to perform at their best. And so you learn a lot of things throughout the years and tips and techniques on how to approach that. And so during COVID, I had a little extra time on my hands, and I said, well, I'm going to write a book and share the practices that I learned. So Christian was saying before this webinar that a few people couldn't attend because they had plant problems. And I said, well, that's probably the people that need to read my book the most to prevent those problems. So hopefully you'll get something out of the book and encourage your friends and others to read the book too. Okay, I'm going to try to, there we go, advance the slides. Okay, so what I learned over the years was you need to simplify your approach, and you need to put it in terms that people can truly understand. And we've come up with a formula that operational excellence, achieving excellence in what you do, it takes 5 different components. It's not one or other, and it's not one more important than the other, but there's 5. So we all know that you need good leadership, you need good people, you need a culture of winning, culture of excellence, you need a management system, and Christian described an enabling tool, enabling software that can help create your system and drive performance. And then you need, in a manufacturing arena, you've got to have good assets, and you have to maintain those properly. So what I'll do today is touch on each of these and try to give you a few tips, specific tips that you can take away and utilize right away. Okay, so one thing that motivates me is if I think of the worst things that can happen. And I think you should too in your organization. Now, in the oil and refining petrochemical business, fire and explosion is the worst thing that can happen, and especially when you have fatalities or injured people. This is a photo of the Macondo incident, the BP incident, and this is the most incredible photograph I've ever seen. I've seen a lot of incidents that have occurred, but can you imagine the people on this platform and a great company like BP, and of course they had a drilling company and others involved, but how things can go so wrong. And typically you find that it's small things that lead to big problems. Everybody would say, well, we need to prevent this, but how do you do it? You have to work on the details. So I could show you photos of other incidents. You might have a company with a major quality incident that impacts your customers. I've seen some that, end up costing hundreds of millions of dollars. And of course you have to protect people, most important. So that's, what we're about is to prevent bad things from happening. And it's very, very important. So you have to start and say in your organization, if you're trying to influence people, what do you really want? And basically you want to protect people, You want good quality. You want reliability, predictability, no confusion. Can you imagine an organization like this where you've really got your act together and you perform every day in a very predictable manner? So easily said, but why are we not that way? So I've just listed a few operational concerns that I hear about all the time. We have too many incidents, and I bet you can relate to some of these. We keep making the same old mistakes. We have an incident, people get all aware of it, and a few years later they've forgotten it, and it happens again. Our system isn't really used. We're constantly investigating and fixing problems instead of moving forward and building on good things. So over and over and over, lots of problems. So I wrote the book to address those issues. Now, so it starts with people, right? We know that it doesn't matter if you're providing a service or you're running a manufacturing operation. The people are the one that are making it happen. And when you investigate an incident and find out now what went wrong, the top causes of incidents have a factor of human performance in there. It's either lack of competence, so people didn't really know, have the skills to do their job. It could be a behavioral issue, recognizing behavior like unsafe acts, mistake prone, whatever. Could be a compliance issue. People aren't following the rules and standards that that your company has. It could be a risk management issue. In other words, do people not recognize the hazards they're getting into, or does the company not address the risks in an appropriate manner? And then finally, leadership. The leadership set the right expectations and hold people accountable so people are doing things the right way. So you say there's always a people element. Now, a lot of experts will say, well, now you can't say a root cause is people. You have to go to systems and culture and all that. Well, I'm one that thinks it's not one or the other, it's both. Okay, so in order to have people and leadership performing at their very best, you have to have the right system in place and culture so that you're doing things in the right manner. So let's talk about culture. Here's the five elements: leadership, people, culture, systems, and assets. So I'll keep coming back to this. So it all begins with culture. You've got to have the right culture in your organization, and everybody has to be on board with that culture. And so one way that I found, I guess the most effective way through the years, and we call it a goal zero culture. Now, you could call it other things. So I've heard of target zero, driving perfect performance, whatever it is, have a theme that's actionable and it impacts behavior. So I'll talk about goal zero, and we did this in Shell. And then when I went to LyondellBasell, the day one, I showed a slide just like this. And I said, we're going to be a goal zero company. Well, first off, everybody thinks you're crazy because when you talk about, you want 0 defects, 0 incidents, 0 unsafe acts, 0 mistakes. People say, well, that's not possible in a big company. Well, the key is to personalize it and say, can you or I work today and not break any rules and use caution so I don't make any mistakes and work the day incident free? And most people will say, yes, I can do that. Okay, so if you get the right culture and understanding across your organization to where every person believes it and operates that way each and every day, you have a very good chance of the whole company performing well. So personalize it and work hard at it. It takes communication, workshops, etc. But I guarantee once you get that culture, you'll be glad that you have it. So that's quick on culture. I mean, you got to go to my book to get a whole lot more detail about what I'm talking about. But then let's get into systems. So everyone knows you have procedures, you have policies, practices, and you roll all that up into a management system. Well, I've seen a lot of company management systems, and some people say they have it, but do they really use it? Do the people know where to find information? And is it up to date? And is it understandable? And do you capture every time there's an incident, either inside the company or outside, do you capture those learnings and update your system? Well, many companies have these problems, and they haven't quite figured out how to resolve it. Now, in our company, I think we hit it pretty well, and I was very, very pleased and comfortable that we had a good system that was usable. And you have to have the right system if you expect people to be in full compliance all the time. So here's a few things. What I say is a sign of a well-functioning management system. First off, are people using it? Do they know where to find the information? Is there a consistent design and structure of the system? Is it updated on a regular basis? Does it contain everything that you need? That's what you want to accomplish. And I describe a lot of tips for doing this in my book. So I'll give you a few tips about organizing a management system. Well, I describe a management system. It's how we do things around here. Okay. So if people want to know, how do you do this? How do you do that? What are the requirements? What's the procedure? What are the specifications? It should be in your management system. Now, we organized our system under 3 categories. One is your process technology. In other words, what is the product you're making, and how do you make it? What are the procedures, the process, the technology to perform that work? The second is functional activities. So various functions like EH&S, procurement, HR, maintenance, whatever function that you want, put it in there. And I put HR in there because I think HR is a big part of achieving operational excellence. How do you hire people? How do you onboard them? How do you train them so they have the right competencies? How do you hold people accountable? All those contribute to operational excellence. And then there's a whole lot of generic operational activities such as operations, maintenance. How do you do hydroblasting? How do you do inspections? How do you conduct a turnaround? So you can fit all of your items into these 3 categories. And if these aren't right for your company, we'll choose the right area. But the main thing is make it so people can find what they're looking for. Now, within each category and topic, we created a concept called excellence models. So you have an excellence model for environment, health, and safety, as an example. All right. So tier 1, these are required activities. In other words, you have a procedure, and most companies will say, you're expected to follow the procedure. It's mandatory, or you have some standards or policies. So tier 1 are things that are required. Tier 2 are things that are recommended. Now, you could slide those into tier 1, but then it gets so bulky that people can't do it. So tier 2 is recommended practices. People should try to follow it, but if they want to deviate a little bit and have a good reason, that's okay. And then tier 3 is a collection of guidance documents, examples, informational items, things that are important for the organization to know. Now, let me talk about simplification and prioritization. I can't emphasize this enough, and we spent a lot of time getting this right for the organization. So here's an example. Let's take any topic. Well, I'll give you an example. When I was at Shell, I wanted, we had 20,000 trucks on the road every day. And so road safety, driving safety was very important. And so I asked the folks to come with a standard, what's going to be our standard of requirements for when you're driving a vehicle. And the first document they brought to me was like 65 pages long. I mean, it had everything in there. And I said, there's no way people are going to read this and be able to comply. And there's no prioritization within it. So I sent them back and we went back and forth till finally they brought something. One guy said, oh, you want the 10 Commandments, not the Bible. And I said, yeah, I guess that's right. So this diagram explains what I'm talking about. So let's say that you had 100 items that you could put in that standard or policy. And most engineers who create these documents, they don't want to leave anything out. So they tend to build a document that's on the far right side. Okay, but if you prioritize those items and say, which one makes the most, adds the most value, which one adds the second most value, you'll find out that you get, 80, 90% of the value out of 10 or 15% of the potential requirements. So the goal zero approach is, and this is hard, you have to prioritize and minimize the number of requirements that you have in a standard and put the other items in a recommended practice. Now, technical experts will argue and say, oh no, all these things are required. But I contend that if you put them all in there, then people will spend as much time on some of the lower priority items and maybe miss and not do some of the most important things. So, people are smart. And if you tell them what's required and they all do that, and you have a company culture of full compliance, then people will spend their time on the other items as they have more time. So this, I can't overemphasize how much this really adds to what you do. Okay, let's go back here one more time. So, one thing you have to do is you have to train your document writers on this concept. You have to have somebody in charge of the whole process so that you maintain some consistency. And there's a method called the flesh reading ease methodology for measuring the complexity of a document. And you want your documents written in a manner that's understandable, like an 8th grade level or so, which is, good for most people. And, a lot of technical people tend to write their documents too complicated. And the key is you want something that's understandable, not something that's complete and overbearing. Okay, then you need in today's age, you need a software system and software tools that enable what you're trying to do. So Voovio, had an example of one of the tools that can drive performance, but you also need other complementary software systems. But overall, they need to be intuitive. They need to be user-friendly. You need to be able to find the information you're looking for. You should have a system that connects people with other people, experts in the area. And you need to have a way that when people learn something, they know who to communicate to get it into your system. So software really makes a difference. And Bill Gates wrote a book called Business at the Speed of Thought. And think about it, that's a wonderful title. He said the systems are there, the software is there. You shouldn't have to waste time looking for things and trying to figure out what or how to do things. The techniques are there, so you need to get them in place. Okay, so once you got your system and your culture right, and that takes a lot of work, but once you've got that right, and then the plants around the world do a gap analysis to your standards and implement, it all comes down to execution. And that's where leadership and people come in. And so, in other words, if your procedures are right and your system is there and you have an incident because somebody didn't follow a procedure, well, that's a people issue, and you have to hold people accountable. And people understand after a while, if we expect people to do things the right way around here, they will do it. They'll step up. So one thing, when you hire people, you've got to hire the right people. And when you bring them in, if you've got a good culture and system, you want to indoctrinate them into your culture and the system, teach them where where to find material, how we do things, how we learn, and then develop the right competencies. And then overall, you start to get the right kind of performance in your organization. And guess what? People like working in a company where there's no confusion and things are straightforward. So your turnover reduces. People like to be on a winning organization, and you need to celebrate success. So it takes a lot of communication. It takes daily relentless pursuit. I'm not saying it's easy, but once you get your culture, your systems, and your assets right, then you can spend all your time on execution. Okay, one final slide here. Communication is so important. And one of the reasons that I organize things under the 5 elements is so that people can clearly understand what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish. So if you look on the left-hand side and you're running a site, or you're running a company, or you're a functional leader, and there's so many things, you investigate incidents, and sometimes it's a procedure problem, sometimes it's a people problem, you know, and people will go back and forth. What's the issue? Well, if it's unstructured, you don't really have a way to communicate and capture things. So I call this the funnel of understanding, is that when you're trying to communicate to people in the organization, you know, tell them we focus in 5 different areas, and, you know, line up your work and your activity under those areas and define clear accountabilities. And then once people understand that, then you can branch out and get to the level of detail. So people will say, it's not simple, you know, nothing we do is simple, but this communication of these 5 elements is pretty simple. You know, if you can simply communicate that and people can understand that, and then you can go and expand out into detail. Now, if you have an incident, the root causes or the various causes will always follow under one or more of these areas. For example, if it's winter and there's icy conditions in the parking lot, and I go walking real fast across the parking lot and I slip on the ice, that's a people issue. That's my behavior that did that. Now, you can't go out and spend the money and eliminate all ice, right? So people need to be careful and use the right behavior. Now, if you happen to have an area that's particularly slippery, then that's an asset issue, right? So you need to go correct that issue, but be careful that you don't always say we have to go change the system, we got to go change the procedure for every incident, because a lot of them are simply behavioral calls. I remember when I was a young engineer, we used to eat lunch in a conference room. Well, a couple of people one day left the conference room messy, and then for a meeting. So then the boss came out and said, no more eating lunch in the conference room. Okay, so he changed the system, the policy, because of the poor behavior of a couple of people. You know, how many times do you see that? You create a new rule that impacts everybody in a negative way because of the behavior of a few. The right approach is address the behavioral issue with those 2, and don't resist adding more and more rules all the time, because that's where you get in trouble. So, you know, an incident may be a people issue, and it may be a leadership. If everybody's making the same mistake, that's a leadership issue, you know, and maybe that's a culture issue. So I think you start to see how these are interrelated. But if you work on each one and address them in that manner, you'll be successful. And what are you really trying to achieve? It's all the things that we started with, you know, safety, reliability, a great customer experience, profitability. It's all the same. It all takes all the same 5 components, you know. So for all of you functional leaders, you know, you've got a CEO that talks about, well, we got to make a profit, you know. Well, if you want to make a profit, you better do good in these 5 areas, you know, or if you want to protect people, you better be good in these 5 areas. It's all the same thing. So with that, you know, that summarizes prepared remarks. I could go on and on, you know, but I'm going to turn it over to Fran to facilitate Q&A, and we're willing to address anything that you want to talk about. Fran?
Okay. Yes, great. Thank you, Sam. We do have some questions that came in, and would remind the audience, if you have any questions, click on the Q&A tab within Zoom and add your question, and we'll get to it. So let's see. So, okay, so the first one looks like it's for Sam. Our company's management system has many of the same problems that you described, such as out-of-date material, too complicated documents, and hard to find information. How should we approach overhauling our system and getting it to the desired state that you described?
Okay, well, that's a pretty broad question. You're saying that you have many of the similar problems. How would I recommend to approach it? Well, that's really why I wrote the book, to say, if I was to go to a new company, how would I approach and close the gaps on those 5 areas? And in the last chapter of my book, or the second to last chapter, I give a 10-step roadmap for what I would do if I was in a company with these problems. And I won't go through all the 10 steps, but first you have to have a compelling platform for what's the problem. You know, what are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to prevent? You've got to get leadership on board. Then you've got to work and get your culture right. You got to get your system right. And then you need to execute and continually improve. So I laid out a 10-step process that I would start from day one if I went to an organization that had those problems. And, you know, I mean, I did it in 3 organizations, and after you've done it a few times, you get better and better at what you do. And so, you know, I just laid it out on the table. And that's exactly how I would approach it if I was in your position.
Okay, good. Okay, Sam, we have another one for you. How would you suggest moving from very detailed procedures to more of a simplified format when the organization culture is to capture everything in a procedure? Sam, you went on mute.
Thank you, Fran. Keep me straight. Okay, so yeah, let's go back to this slide. This is one that I think you can communicate with and train your procedure writers and document writers. You know, I guess if you think of electronic equipment that you buy, you know, how many times have you pulled out the instructions and you read it and they're so complicated? I mean, you can't understand what they're trying to say, and you underline certain words, and you almost have to make your own notes on the side to determine what is it I'm trying to do. So that document was written by a technical expert, you know, thinking in technical terms and writing it down that way, as opposed to a user who is busy. I mean, people in the field are extremely busy, you know, so when they go to a procedure or whatever, it needs to be bang, bang, bang. You know, every word, like if you go to the flash reading ease method I told you about, you can score every document. Make sure we required our document writers to write as clearly as possible. Like some procedures might say, you need to do this and that and that and that, you know, 4 concepts in 1 sentence with commas, right? If you put those in bullet form, that in itself is a lot more simple for people to understand. So you want it to be understandable, and then, you know, really push from right to left on this chart and force yourself to take out the lower priority items and procedures and standards, and keep driving that hard so that it's written with the user in mind and not the writer. And I'll tell you what, if you spend that time, getting your documents right, think of the leveraging effect that has. So a person writing a procedure may be used by tens or hundreds of people, right? So if you spend the time to get that right, it's going to make everybody else work smarter instead of harder. And that's really what you want to accomplish.
That's good. Thank you, Sam. And if I could add something from what we're seeing in the industry around procedures, it's to your very point, you simplify them by putting them in an action checklist format. So the end user is really only required to perform that action and not get into all the other technical verbiage about what's behind those actions. So helping that end user understand the key action that they have to take, and use other means to explain the why, but that'll simplify the procedures and cut out a lot of the extra unnecessary items in the procedure. So thank you for that.
I totally agree with that, Fran. There's different philosophies about procedure. Some people think you want to put all that accompanying information in the procedure, and I'm one that says no. Take that detail, all the why and the background information, and put that in your tier 3 documentation, which is reference material, training. Okay, make sure you do the right competencies, and in your software system, have that all linked, so that the actual procedure when the person's doing the job is as simple as possible.
Yep, agree. Okay, next question. Looks like it's a Voovio question. For a project, how long does it take to implement an entire project?
Okay, yeah, I can take that one, Fran. So yeah, it depends on the scope. So let's talk about a typical project, and our experience of typical projects could be 20, 30, 40, or even 50 procedures in one project. So that takes about 12 to 18 weeks to deliver. Of course, we've done it faster, but basically within 3 to 4 months you'll have a finished product. And the time required on site is very, very low. We just need a subject matter expert available to walk us through the procedures. But delivery times have been fairly consistent, 3 to 4 months, regardless of the size of the project.
Okay, good. Thank you, Christian. Our next question looks like it's for Sam. Which leader do you think best achieves the kind of operational excellence that you describe?
Well, I know a lot of good leaders out there, but let me give it a sports analogy. So if you follow college football, of course, I'm a University of Texas fan, and we haven't been in the top category for a while, but Alabama they are the cream of the crop. And Nick Saban is the most successful college football coach out there. And, throughout the years, I've studied a lot of leadership examples in industry and sports and, across the board. And if you listen to Nick Saban, he will tell you, if he hires a new assistant coach into his organization, he doesn't want that assistant coach to come in and do things his own way. The first thing he does with that assistant coach, he comes in and says, I want you to learn my system, or Alabama system, how we recruit, how we train our players, how we hold them accountable, how we motivate them, how we condition them. I want you to learn our system, and then I want you to execute our system. Now, if you have a better idea about how to do things, we can update our system. Okay, but don't just come in here and do things your own way. Now, I would think a lot of coaches probably hire assistants and let them do it their own way, right? But you're never going to achieve consistency and world-class performance if you have that kind of variation. It's the same thing in companies. If you let every new plant manager run things his or her own way, then you're going to have, by definition, variation. and you're never going to build on the best practices. And Nick Saban, he wins and wins and wins. And, you know, and everybody hires his assistant coaches away from him. And he continues to win because he's not bouncing all over the place with different ways to do things. Continues to perfect his culture and his management system so that when he brings his people on board, it's all about execution. And, you know, so I think he's an outstanding leader, and he demonstrates it, and he doesn't hesitate to share that. You know, I love listening to his press conferences because you learn every time. You know, this last time he talked about, or I think after his first game, he was talking about we made too many penalties and we made too many errors. He said, well, it's all a matter of behavior, you know, and if a person chooses to have the wrong behavior, well, then they're probably not going to run or play. And anyway, he talks about the elements, you know, it's all about people, behavior management, leadership, the system, culture. You know, he's got it. And I'm going to send him an autographed book, but not during football season. I'm sure he's pretty busy right now.
That's good. Okay, let's see. Sam, I have another question for you. Don't you think that senior leadership in some companies are usually too focused in profitability and forget the holistic approach that you described so well? Safety, culture, etc. It all comes together.
Of course they are. You know, some top leaders, CEOs inherently believe in safety and all these other things, and others, it's not on their mind. Okay. But if you're a functional leader, your job is to make sure you fill the gaps where they don't have the proper focus. And you can do that by, like what I always did with my CEOs was provide them with the right talking points that supported our culture and our management system. And, you know, you got to help them to be the right kind of leader. And you have to convince them that if all they care about is profitability, you've got to convince them that to achieve profitability, it's the same thing that it takes for safety and compliance and everything else. It's all the same. And so people won't argue about the things you do for safety. And so it makes perfect sense to lead with safety. A CEO, once they understand, they will promote the heck out of safety, because they know if you have an organization where people are being safe, they're not making mistakes, they're watching their behavior, they're doing things to perfection, guess what? Your plants are going to run better, and you're going to have quality. You're going to get what you're looking for. So sometimes if a leader doesn't inherently know that, you've got to help them. That's your job, to make sure the leader understands the linkage. And that goes for commercial leaders too. A lot of commercial leaders don't know anything about operation. So you have to train them, you have to educate them and get them understanding how important it is.
That's good. Thank you. Our next question, looks like it's for Voovio. It's for a Voovio project. Can we update content, or does Voovio have to update all content changes?
Yeah, I can take that one, Fran. So customers do get access to an update tool, and they can make the majority of changes themselves. If you remember, we showed you the simulators, I think. So you can make changes to the action checklist. You know, you can make steps more simple. You can add those knowledge snippets, even change the behavior of the simulation. But we can also do, you know, we've got a team that's supporting customers to do all those updates for them. So it really depends on, you know, whether a customer site has the resources to do it themselves, or if they want us to take care of it.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Our next one looks like it's for Sam. Sam, you talk about leadership, people, culture, systems, and assets. Which one is the most important?
Ah,
That's a
Well,
loaded one.
I tell you what, don't ever let anybody drag you down into that discussion, because people will say, well, what's more important, safety, or is it profitability or quality? You know, because they're thinking in tunnel vision, right? They're thinking about safety, or they're thinking about whatever. Tell them what's most important is operational excellence. You know, we want to have excellence in everything we do. And that way, if you say, well, that's what's most important, and if you achieve that, you'll get safety and quality and reliability and all that. And the way to get it, go through your those 5 areas. So you see my theme, what I talk about, it helps you to communicate. It helps you for people to understand, and it helps to focus on what you need to do. And it also, in incidents, helps you to understand what went wrong and where you need to go focus. So I've heard it many, many times. Well, what's most important? Well, operational excellence is what's most important.
Well said. Yep. Okay, our next question looks like it's for Sam as well. Can you talk more about how to create a strong culture in a company?
Okay, well, I covered that in I'll try to go to that slide, in establishing a goal zero culture. I think if you choose that, I describe it a lot in my book. Okay, I talk about ways to do it. If you choose a different kind of culture, you know, it's you got to approach it kind of the same way, but with a different intention. But I think achieving a culture, first off, you need to make it very clear what your expectations are. And in fact, we had what we called an expectations document, and it had 40 clear expectations. Like, one of them was every employee and contractor is expected to work safely, to report incidents, you know, to avoid mistakes, to always follow the rules. Okay. Another expectation is you have to keep your management system at the site level and corporate up to date. And so that's a good leadership practice, to go through and get your expectations very clear and then communicate that to everybody. And then what we would do on audits, every time we audit a facility, we would send out a questionnaire of those 40 expectations to every employee and nested contractors, and let them say, are you doing it? Is this happening at your site or location? And sometimes you find out the leaders say, yes, we're doing it, but all the people say, no, we're not.
Yeah, no.
Guess what? That gives you something to talk about, right? You know, so set your expectations crystal clear about your culture, define it in simple terms, and then you've got to communicate it all the time. And what I like about goal zero, it can be an adjective or it can be a noun. You know, you could say, we're trying to achieve goal zero, or if there's an incident, that's not goal zero behavior. You know, people in your organization will start to use goal zero in their in their vocabulary and everyday discussions. So, you know, when contractors come in, our operators tell them right off the bat, we're a goal zero company. You know, we expect these things. And, you know, the first day or two that a contractor's on your property, that's when you have the most opportunity to influence behavior. They find out real quickly if you have outstanding housekeeping or not, or they find out real quickly, do you follow the rules or not? You know, so you've got to live the culture, and you have to personalize it. You know, get it personal, each person, to where they're proud to work in a company with the right kind of culture. You know, so that would be my advice if you're trying to establish a culture in your organization.
Good. Thank you. Looks like let's go ahead and we'll take one more question. Let's see, it's a Voovio question. Okay, for a Voovio project, how many resources does it take to implement? Christian, if you want, I can take that one.
Yeah.
So basically, Christian touched on it before when he was talking about our projects. It takes very few resources from our customer. We basically do the bulk of the work for you. We show up on site with our engineers and spend a couple of days there with your subject matter expert, walking the procedures, and we finish the project off-site, not involving the team, and 3 to 4 months later, we'll deliver all the content for the subject matter expert to do a final review. So very few resources from a Voovio side, or from a customer to be involved with a Voovio project. So yes, good question. There are more questions. Sorry we didn't get to them, but I do want to wrap up and respect everybody's time. So first, I want to thank Sam for joining us today and covering his book, The Power of Goal Zero. He explained the 5 components that lead to operational excellence: leadership, people, culture, systems, and assets. He shared his experiences and gives us an opportunity to reflect on where our organizations are and where those gaps might be. So I encourage everyone to read his book. And additionally, with respect to systems and people, Christian touched on how Voovio technologies can bring a solution to bring that organizational competency through the people development. It ties it all together nicely in a system. So with that, that concludes our webinar. If you have any questions and want to contact Sam, Christian, or I, the information is on the screen on how to get a hold of us. And the seminar recording will be available in a couple of days. So thank you all and have a safe day.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.